Good morning, everyone. How is it going? It's me, Ursula, and I realized today that it has been 1 year. Today marks the 1 year anniversary of me doing these Monday live stream painting sessions. And I didn't do them every single Monday over the last year, but did a lot of them. So if you're interested, you can go back to my channel and check out all the videos on there. Yeah, this has been a really fun experience to do these videos, and it's actually taught me a lot as well. So I appreciate everyone coming back and checking these out. And, I hope that there's something that you get from them. So today we are going to be talking all about brushes, because I often get questions about which brushes are best for painting. And I am really into brushes. I'm almost like more into brushes than the paint in terms of, what's going to help your practice. I think really perfect brushes are the way to go. Hey, Jamie, thank you. Can you believe it's been a year? I mean, I can believe it, actually. So, yeah, for me, I've noticed people's paintings completely change when they get the correct brush to work with. So I want to talk about brushes, and we're going to do a fun little study also using our brushes. Hey, Lisa. Good morning. So to prepare for today, just go ahead and grab all your brushes. Make sure all your brushes are in front of you, and then give yourself some paints to work with. You could work with oils today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between working with oils and acrylics and brushes and all that. And any surface you want to work on, I don't have any canvases at the moment, so I'm just going to be working on paper. But if you have canvas or paper and paper, use both. Hi, Joan. Good morning. Let's see, I have something in my eye. Whew. Okay. It's not coming out. So let's go ahead. Let's give ourselves some paint. We're not going to get so much into color mixing today. So whatever paints you want to use, I'm going to just give myself the full palette again. And I'll probably give myself some black also. But brown, blue, red. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. Happy spring, Joanne. Yeah, I went back. I was like, I know it's about a year that I've been doing this. So I went back and I looked, and sure enough, March 22nd or 23rd was my first official live stream video. And it was about yellows and purples, working with yellow and purple, because I was inspired by the violets and the daisies and the daffodils. And it's weird because in my memory, I feel like there had been more warm days by this point, and more things blossoming, but I think they have been blossoming in just the last couple of days. So I don't know. It's weird because in my memory, I started this like later in spring. But the last year has basically been a time warp, so who knows? Okay. So I'm going to talk about brushes. We're going to do a fun study. I meant to share a picture. I don't have any right now, but let's see, I'm going to type in tree branches because you might work from a photograph of tree branches just for inspiration, just for visual inspiration. And let's see, I'm going to pull some up here and share it with you. Just because we're going to be exploring different ways to make lines with our brushes. So something, if you do a Google search for tree branches, I'm going to just share this image, but I don't know how clear that is. It's not very clear. Let's see, this one could be good. Actually, this is a really nice one. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share this one. We were just going to use those tree branches as an inspiration to create different line variations, different thicknesses and thinness with lines, as we talk about our brushes. So I want to first start. Often people ask me what brand of brush to get. And believe it or not, for acrylic paint, I think just a basic brand of craft brushes is actually pretty good. Like if you can get a good brand, like this is Royal, what is it? I can't see my brand on here, but this came in a set of like 5 or 6 brushes that you get in the craft section at Michael's or wherever. I really like these brushes for acrylics, and the reason why is because they have synthetic bristles, and I know that seems like, you know, we always want like natural bristles and all that, but actually synthetic bristles for acrylics are pretty good. They're soft, so you can blend your paint if you need to, but there's also a nice buoyancy to the bristle, and that helps with pushing the paint across the page. So I generally tend to get like a set of these, and I don't have any with me right now. I don't have an actual set, but like 5 or 6 of these brushes in a set. The other thing is that I look for what are called flat brushes. So a flat is this kind of brush where the ferrule, this metal part, is flattened. And the reason why is you can cover a lot with that, but you can also make nice lines with it. Hey, Amanda. So as far as brands go, like I said, I don't even know what this is. I'm seeing Royal, but I'm not finding any other. Oh, here's another. This is like Artist Loft, and it's just a craft brush. It's came in a set with some other brushes. Another, if you do want to like get mix and match brushes, another brand I really like is this called Simply Simmons. Here's a better example. It's these, they have a white handle and a black ferrule like this. You can get them individually and kind of mix and match. And each brush costs the same. I think it's like $2 or $3. They're not super pricey. And I like to get this kind that has these brown, soft bristles. They also make them with coarse bristles, but I like these soft bristles, especially for acrylic paint. If you get a long handle or a short handle, that's up to you. Traditionally, the short handles were used for watercolor painting, and long handles are used when you're at an easel for acrylics or for oils, but I use a combination of both. So that's a nice affordable brand. And another really good affordable brand is this brand called Snap. It's Snap with an exclamation point, and it's put out by Princeton. And you can get these in a set sometimes or individually. Again, very affordable brush and like excellent to work with. I love these bristles. Like you want to look for bristles that have a little bit of a bounce to them like that. And like I said, I love the synthetics. They're soft. You can blend if you want to or not. These are good for working on smooth surfaces, especially like if you're going to work on paper or board or a canvas that's smooth, that's slick. These are really nice for that. So I like to get a variety of flats. These are all flats. When they're cut straight across like this, that's called a bright. When they are curved at the top, this is a big example, but this is called a filbert, but it's still a flat. And these just make a slightly rounder mark, and we'll play around with that. So I use flats the most, and the other kind of brush that's out there is a round, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's start off by working with our flats a little bit. So grab your favorite flat if you have one, and if you don't have soft bristle, if you only have coarse bristle, like this is an example of a coarse bristle brush, hog bristle. These make a scratchier mark. So these are generally meant if you're going to be working on a more textured surface, like a canvas, or if you're going to work thicker with your paint. So I'll show you the difference between these two brushes. So if you want to work from the branch photo I sent you, just for an example of line variation, go ahead, or just work out of your head. I'm going to work out of my head today just to show you some ways of using these brushes. So I'll start with a flat, and I'm going to mix up a dark color. I'm going to take brown, blue, and a little bit of red to start with. I dipped it in the water first. So when you're mixing your colors, you see how I'm just keeping it halfway on my bristle like that? That's the ideal. You don't want to smash your brush in the paint and mix it. You want to keep it at the end of the bristle if possible. And then what I want you to try doing is making a flat mark like this, but then try twisting your brush and getting these thinner lines, maybe thicker, thinner, just by twisting your brush. And just try to get a variety of lines. Maybe like the branches, try to make them a little thinner and taper off at the end. But these brushes are great when you start to learn to control them for creating these line variations. And I personally find it's a lot easier to make lines this way than using a really small detail brush like this, which we'll talk about later. But like these, I use these large flat brushes mostly in my painting. So just play around with that. If you want, flip your brush if you need to. Sometimes if you have your panel or your canvas, whatever you're working on, down like this, and you work this way, sometimes the paint will fall a little bit easier off your brush, like gravity will kind of pull it off your brush a little bit easier. But just, try different things. And like I said, you could use the branches as reference or just play around and try to make different line thicknesses. You might even try to write your name or something with your brush. So try that if you do have like, so let's see, I wish I had more brushes that I don't like around. I don't really. But if you have a brush that's a little bit coarser, try the same thing with it and just see if there's a difference in the way the mark comes out. So first of all, when I'm using this brush, I can hear it, which is fine, but there's a little bit of a scrubbing sound. And you can see the lines in the brush stroke a little bit more. So nothing wrong with this, but just be aware that you get a scratchier mark with this. And I'm on paper, so I can blend on this, but if you're on a canvas or something, it might be a little bit harder to blend your marks. If your brush is really splayed out, like maybe you have an old brush that doesn't have that's kind of dirty or like hard, splayed out, like I said, you could try working with that and seeing if you get, how that's different. Here's a really coarse brush I'm going to try working with so you see the difference. First of all, I can hear it, but there's like little lines in the mark that are like, I'm not getting a really crisp mark. Again, nothing wrong with this. Generally, the more textured your brush is, the more textured your surface should be. So this would probably be good on a canvas, but on paper, I don't love it. And I can't get like a nice crisp stroke with this. Here's one that's a little more splayed out, and this is an angled brush. Sometimes it just takes like some practice with the brush to learn how to control it. But this one I didn't love because it is kind of splayed out. And I personally don't love these angle brushes. There's a whole, like, you're supposed to be able to make like petals with them, pressing and then kind of lifting up your brush. And there's a whole, like, I don't know, like a whole business that this woman came up with doing this and selling these kind of brushes. But to me, it's still a limited kind of way to work. But, if you have some of these angled brushes, go ahead and play around with those too. See what you can get. But personally, my favorite are the brights, the ones that are cut straight across, just because I can, if I need to, I can really load them up with a lot of color and fill in a big area on my canvas. And then I can also go a little smaller and make these lines with them. So I definitely got away from the tree branches. But I hope that you're just trying to create different marks with the brush, different line thicknesses and variations. Brush strokes make a huge difference in a painting. If you could blend all your brush strokes out so you don't see them, that's generally, you have to do that when your paint is still wet. And these soft bristle brushes will allow you to do that easily. So, but you can also experiment with the direction of your brush strokes and how that changes your painting in the future, whether you're doing a landscape or, still life. The direction of your brush strokes will have a big um, will make a big difference in your painting. And it can make it really dynamic. So yeah, with the soft bristle brushes, I'm able to just blend right there on my canvas. Um, if you're working with oils, there's sometimes a brush, I think it's called a mop brush. It's a big fluffy brush. And if the oils are all wet, you can just take it to the entire painting and it will soften everything out. So the other thing I like to do with these flat brushes is I like to use the corners of them and make like little dots with the corners of the brushes. Um, so yeah, these are, I mean, the brights especially. And that's why I like this kind of brush because I get a wide variety of brush marks. So there are expensive brushes out there that you can buy, and they're probably fine. But I have noticed every time I buy an expensive brush, something happens in my brain. I don't wash it and I ruin it right away. So honestly, these inexpensive brushes are just as good. Um, I don't even have any brushes that are super expensive. This one was $12. Um, but yeah, I haven't used it much. So this is a round brush. I'm going to talk about rounds now. Rounds make a slightly different mark. This is a round. The ferrule is round. These were used by Impressionist painters because they would make like a rounder mark. So just go ahead. If you are working on your branches, you know, maybe you can switch to a round to make some leaves to see how that's a little bit different. I'm going to put some water. So I can get, like, this is pretty much the mark that I can get with a round. Maybe I can turn the brush and lift it and get a slightly thinner mark towards the end, but I'm still pretty limited in what I can do with that brush. So this is why I don't use these a lot, but I mean, it depends. If I'm making a really dense painting, you know, maybe I'll play around with these rounds, making these marks like the Impressionists with broken color. Um, but yeah, it's pretty limited. You could try like, I like to twist the brush in my hand and see what kind of marks come out in the paint. But it is a little bit limited what you can do with these brushes. They're still super fun. I mean, I really like this big one for, you know, working real big. I mean, I don't have, I use this for like big canvases, but it's pretty fun to smush it down and then, you know, lift it up. This is definitely a really fun brush. But yeah. And this is probably one of the most expensive brushes I've gotten, and it still wasn't very expensive. So because it's soft bristle, you know, I can blend a lot of this now. So a lot of rounds are really good for making lines. Okay, question. Textured paper for acrylic seems to soak up all moisture really quickly, so the paint is gone before the intended application. Yes, so there's if you're using like a porous paper like watercolor paper, and which I actually have here, it's gonna suck up all the paint. So this is why watercolor paper is, I don't really recommend a really porous paper. When I say textured paper, there's a thing called canvas paper, and it's paper that's pressed into a weave of canvas, and then there's a coating on it. So the paint still sits on the top. It's a non-porous paper. Um, let's see. Do I want to talk about? I'm gonna do some lines here with my round brush, and then I'll talk about the difference between working with an absorbent paper and a paper that's not as absorbent, because surfaces really do change how your paints work. But basically, Joan, short answer is use more water. And yeah, I'll get to that in just a second. Let's just talk about round brushes, like making details with small rounds. Like I said, I actually don't have a lot. I don't keep a lot of these around. This is like my collection of these because I think it's really good practice to try to paint details with a big brush. Try to paint small details with the big brush. And we'll talk about how you might be able to do that. But these are fun still. Like I really like the script brush. That's what this one is. When you use this, you usually have to water your paint down a little bit more. And I find it's easier to work flat with this kind of a brush, so the gravity really helps pull the paint off of the bristles. But these script brushes are really fun for getting a nice line variation as well, like pushing down, lifting up, doing this kind of thing. Maybe you can try writing your name with something like this also. But these script brushes, they have a longer bristle. They hold a little more material. So you can make like these longer marks with them. You can work with them more as opposed to a small brush like this. These are good for just small little details. And this isn't a good one because you can see it's kind of, the bristles are kind of splaying out, but you want to get all the excess paint off it so it's not super globby. And then, this is what I do with it. I do these little lines, and that's about it. If I need to do like little details on something, sometimes if I need to do my signature on something, little hairs, little highlights, I might use a small brush like this. But I really don't use this kind of brush a lot. If anything, I would use a smaller flat brush, like something like this, because this one's a little bit, it's not in such great condition, but if you have a good one of these, you can get a nice mark using the side of these. So I personally like to do details with these smaller flat brushes as opposed to the small rounds, but we all find our comfort zone. Sometimes people, because they're so used to working with pens and pencils and small tips like that, they just like use tiny brushes. These small brushes aren't going to get you that far when you have to fill in a big space. I mean, you can do it, but it's a little more of an effort. And it's not quite using the brush, like the painting medium, for what it is. It just took me a while to fill in this, which would be one mark of paint. Some areas where people tend to have problems with their brushes is they don't use enough paint. Like they're afraid to use paint, so they'll just use a tiny bit and then, you know, try to paint this whole thing with just a little bit of paint. So, you know, don't be afraid to grab like a nice healthy amount of paint. And, you know, you're pushing it across the surface. And like I said, if you think you need to blend it, these soft bristle brushes are good for that. Okay. So I hope that just helps to introduce you to what some of these brushes do. I think it's a really good challenge to try to make a whole painting with one larger flat brush. Ways that you could create detail with something like this. Let's go back to our branches. I'll just do a little branch over here in the corner. So maybe I start by trying to get some of these curves in here. When I'm trying to create like the roundness of something, what I do is I paint the whole line first, then I'll take a lighter value and paint that over the top of it and leave some of that dark value showing. To me, that's a lot easier than, you know, what I'll see people do is like make a branch and then they take a small detail brush and they try to get in there and paint like the tiniest shadow on it. And it's not like that's impossible. And sometimes I'll go back in and do that at the very end. But I think it's easier to make a big, fat, juicy, dark line and then put the lighter line over it and leave a little bit of that dark line. So that could be something you try with your branches today if you're still working on those. Try layering your colors over the top of that. So like your highlights or whatever. If I need to reshape this and really make it smaller, I'll take like, let's say I'm going to make the sky. This is against a blue sky. I'll take my paint and then I'll go right up to the edge of this and reshape it that way. So I've created this thin line right here without using any small brushes. Maybe I'll go right up to some of these and paint out. If I think they're too thick, I'll paint out that line to thin it down. And this is what I tell people, like a lot of people complain that their hand shakes and they can't get a lot of detail. And this is one way of doing that, is to just cut away at it so you get the detail. And then if you want to go back with a small flat and pull out that dark line again, you can. But to me, it's easier to make small lines this way than trying to use a lot of teeny brushes. Okay, so Joan's question about working with textured paper. I have some watercolor paper here, which is pretty textured. Watercolor paper is absorbent. It's meant for watercolors. It's, if you just use acrylic paint, like the way I do, let's say, when I start painting, you can see there's a little bit of a dry mark there, like that. That's what happens with papers that are really absorbent. You get this dry mark, this dry brush effect. And some people love this for texture. I tend to like it for a part of a painting, but not the whole painting. So if that's happening, use a little more water. And this is why I like those synthetic brushes, because you can do that with these. Use more water, they'll hold some water, and then paint with a little bit more water on there, like a watercolor. And you might, work flat. Watercolor brushes, the really floppy ones, I don't like those for acrylic painting, but the intention of them is to hold a lot of water and release it onto the page, as opposed to pushing the paint the way we would with acrylics. Acrylics are thicker, but yeah, you want to, if you're working with this really absorbent paint, you want to use more fluid in your paint. Sorry, if you're working with really absorbent paper, use more fluid. When you're working with acrylics, there's polymers in the paint. So as you build the layers, they start to make the paper less porous. So if you're building layers and layers of acrylic paint, you'll notice if I let this dry and paint on top of it, it's going to be slightly less porous than it was originally. So as you build up your paint, as those polymers are absorbing into the fibers of the paper becomes less porous and it's easier to push the paint along on it. But this is again something I love about acrylics is, you can work like this, more like oils, or you can work thicker. But yeah, if the paper is just soaking up all your paint, use more fluid in it. If there's any other questions about brushes, there's so much more I feel like I could talk about. Let's see. As far as cleaning the brushes, the best way to clean them, it's good because acrylics are easy to clean relatively, like just stomp them out as good as possible in your water. And then if there's still paint stuck in them, take them to the sink, put a little bit of soap on your palm and just like do this kind of a motion so that the soap gets in between the bristles and then wash it out that way. But I try to avoid using soap because apparently it kind of breaks down the bristles a little bit. Oil paints are a lot more difficult that way to clean because there's like oil. So you need to use a lot more like elbow grease to clean your oil paints. When I store my brushes, I store them like this with the bristles up. And that way the water drips down the handle into, and it doesn't cause the ferrule to crack and the glue to crack here. If you get really cheap brushes, you run the risk of them shedding all over your paper. or they'll be like really coarse and splayed out. Um, as my brushes get older and like harder to deal with, I still keep them around. Like something like this, I still keep it around for gluing, for blending, because it still is pretty soft. So I'll still keep this handy for some things, but it might not be the best for getting like a really crisp mark. But yeah, as far as brands, I mean, I generally always try to find different brands to just try them out. So I have many different brands, and I'm just always looking for a nice buoyancy to the bristle like that. And like I said, I like a soft textured synthetic bristle. I mean, this is a coarser bristle. This I would use for like a wash or something, but I wouldn't try to get a lot of detail with this. I'd use it for some big brush strokes maybe in one of my bigger oil paintings, but I wouldn't really try to get tons of detail because it is a little bit floppier. So yeah, like a mop brush or something like this. Like this is a pretty inexpensive brush that I wouldn't really try to get a lot of detail. This is more of like a brush for texture. It's not, I just can't. I mean, I know I'm working on a different surface, but it's a little harder. I don't even really have any of those really floppy watercolor brushes because I can't use them. This is a brush with a long bristle. These are really fun, actually. If as long as it's buoyant enough, this kind of thing, you can get a nice momentum with something like this, with pushing the paint across the page or across the canvas. These are really nice, but you just want to use half of the brush, half of the bristle. So there's a really good, I'll need to link to it in the below, but there's a really good video out there that this woman made about the history of brushes and in European artwork. And she talks about how in fresco painting, which was the original that preceded oil painting, the paint would dry so quickly. So the artists had to work differently with the brushes than they would with oils, where paint, you can blend it longer. And she talks about, I'm going to use the back side of this, with fresco or oil tempera paintings, because the paint dried so fast, the artist would have to make the paint strokes really close to each other and then hope that maybe they would have enough time to blend them before they dried. And then they would do it again. So they would do the painting in small batches rather than, larger paintings. And then when oil painting came into prominence through the Italian Renaissance painting, artists would blend a lot more and create layers and layers of blended paint. It's just really interesting to look at how the brushes changed, how paintings appeared. The Impressionists used rounder brushes, like I said. This book I have of women's self-portraiture, there's early paintings where the artists are painting themselves and you see like just tiny little palette here of paint and these small brushes. And then as you get into later times, the palettes are really big. And there's a lot of color on the palettes. And it's just interesting to see like the shift. So like with this self-portrait, you see like her big palette here leaning against her arm and these big applications of paint. So it's kind of interesting to see how different painting, how technology changed over the years. Here's one from the 1700s. And it's just fun to see her paint palette in that. So I'm working on the back side of my poster paper. This is the slick side, and it has like a clay coating or something on it. So the paint handles so differently on this kind of a surface than it does on the absorbent side. I still really like painting on it, but it's just a lot different. You see like the paint's a lot streakier. So if you have a really smooth surface like this, that's what's going to happen. Your paint's going to be streaky, and you have to build up layers of paint to avoid that. So I know I strayed very far from the branches. And I didn't do them, but I hope some of you were able to work on them. So here, this is a good example of, I'm using a soft brush, and even though I'm using a soft brush, there's still these lines in the paintbrush stroke. And that's just because this paper is so smooth. Like it's like shiny smooth. And so that's why that's happening. So I guess to avoid that, I'm going to try using a little more paint and maybe not press as hard and try to blend it if I don't want that look. But sometimes you also have to choose your canvas or your paper for your look. Like if you know that this is going to happen in your painting, then don't use this surface for your painting. I guess the only other brush I haven't really talked about is the fan brush. I don't use the fan brush a lot. I know that Bob Ross uses it for his trees. Like he'll do these like little tree things in his paintings. I just don't really tend to use this brush except for like an abstract mark making stuff. It's really fun. I mean, you can do fun things with it. You can get fun swirls with it. You know, maybe like this could be like reflections on water or something. So it's really fun for that, but I find I don't have a lot of control with it, but I guess maybe if I just tried it more, I would. But yeah, I don't use this brush a lot, but it's definitely pretty fun. So maybe I'll start using it more. Maybe I'll try to do like a portrait with just this brush or something. But I like it for getting like these fun swirls and fun marks with it. So fan brushes are cool. Some people will use them just to blend because they're usually soft. So they usually will splay apart a little bit so you can get some fun lines in there. Other novelty brushes I have these rubber tipped brushes. These are for, they were originally for ceramics, but they can kind of cut through your paint or make like little dots. I personally can't get a lot of control with them, but again, like I'll use these just for making different marks with them, but they're not my favorite. They work better on something like this that's a little slicker. But those are kind of fun, just novelty brushes. There's brushes with different cuts to the bristles. This is this like tiny, tiny worn away brush that I might use for blending purposes. But yeah, I don't really throw my brushes out very often. I always keep them around for something. And then as far as palette knives go, if you are going to work with the palette knife, I have some experience working with palette knives. I tend to work with it more using oils. But if I'm going to work with a palette knife, I prefer to use it on like a canvas, like a stretched canvas that has a little bit of give to it. I don't love working on like panel with this, but you know, to each their own. But when I use a palette knife, I really try to load up the paint and use it more like frosting, like I'm frosting a cake. So, you know, using it fairly thick on the painting. You know, and then of course you can cut away into that if you want to. But I find the thicker the paint, the better the result. And there's all different kinds of palette knives out there. One thing I don't love seeing is when the palette knife marks are overwrought, like overworked. You know, I think like try to get it in one swoop or try to get it in several swoops. Like the more, and in general with painting, like the more immediate you can be and the less like worked over the painting looks. I think the viewers tend to respond to just like a more spontaneous mark or a more immediate mark rather than one that looks like it's been like you know, worked and reworked and, you know, or maybe like so much paint keeps going on there. I think just like the fresher the mark, the better. But, you know, that's a generalization. That's not necessarily true in all cases. I like doing this kind of thing, and I scrape it all off. But when I work with the palette knife, I tend to actually start with a brush and then apply the paint over the top. Maybe next week we'll do a palette knife painting together. So I think I'm done talking about brushes. I just, you know, as far as brands go, I say like get a set of craft brushes, good size, flats, good, like this is an awesome flat brush right here. This is the Snap brand. I think these are great for oils or acrylics, even watercolor. These are really good for, they're really versatile. So that's my favorite. Synthetic, buoyancy to the brush. That's my favorite because it's the most versatile. But I would say just try different things out, you know, until you land on some brushes that really work for you. So let me know if there's any questions. If not, I'm going to sign out of here a little bit early today. I hope you learned a little bit something about brushes. And I'll hang out for a couple minutes here with my cat who's getting impatient. Kitty. She's like, can you please feed me? All right, well, I'm going to check out. Thank you, everyone. This was really fun. And I hope you learned something about brushes. And um, thanks, Jamie. Feel free to send me your paintings of tree branches. I know I didn't really get into it this lesson, but maybe another lesson we'll just focus on those. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good week. I'll see you next time. Bye.